The thing that you look out for as a hotshot, of course, is fire. Hotshots trade stories of the ones that got out of control, narrow escapes, legendary fires from the past. I love to hear about the blazes that went back before our time. The one that you heard the most was South Canyon. That was sort of the model of what could go wrong for a wildland firefighter in the Southwest. It had all the elements we saw every day: wind, storm, flame, steep slopes, chaparral. But those elements had come together in just a few short minutes and killed 14 firefighters. Before I joined up, Granite Mountain had even gotten a trip together called a staff ride, which all the hotshot crews do as part of their training to go visit Storm King Mountain, where the fire happened in central Colorado, just to study the terrain and study the decisions those firefighters had made. The Granite Mountain crew wanted to honor their sacrifice by learning from it. South Canyon began with a drought. On July 2nd, 1994, after 2 years of low rainfall, a lightning strike ignited a wildfire near the base of Storm King Mountain, which is part of the Rocky Mountain system. Like many lightning fires, it started high up on a ridge, this time in a thicket of pinyon, pine, and juniper. It was one of 40 wildfires set off by dry lightning storms in the span of a few days, and South Canyon was at first thought to be among the minor ones. The terrain was rugged and inaccessible to vehicles and lacked any possible helispot to land a chopper. No hotshots or resources were dedicated to the fight in the first 2 days, and the fire consumed only 3 acres. It was skunking along the ridgeline, making the locals nervous but doing little damage. Left to its own devices, the fire grew. On the morning of July 5th, 7 firefighters hiked 2.5 hours and began cutting a landing area for a helicopter on the steep slope and a fire break to hold the fire on its southwest flank. An air tanker dropped a load of retardant. The crew worked all day and left in the evening to do maintenance on their chainsaws. They were replaced by 8 smoke jumpers who parachuted in from jump planes. The smoke jumpers saw that the fire had already sloped over the first fire lane, cut by 7 firefighters, so they started constructing a second one on the east side of the ridge. A cold front was brewing not far from the fire zone. On July 5th, the National Weather Service issued a red flag warning for the area, which meant ideal conditions for a wildland fire combustion had been reached: low humidity, dry fuel, and high gusting winds. For the civilian, a red flag warning means get ready to move. But the next morning, the meteorologist responsible for warning firefighters on the Colorado blazes about changing conditions realized the front was more powerful than he'd first imagined. It was carrying gusts up to 40 miles per hour. The winds could roll over a fire and blow it up without any advanced warning. The firefighters needed to know the weather situation was becoming potentially hazardous. The meteorologist got on the phone and made a series of urgent calls to different dispatchers. When he called Grand Junction District, which was overseeing the South Canyon fire, they thanked him and promised to get the news out. But the channels were bristling with updates from various crews and officials. The message got lost in the rush and never broadcast to the men and women on the ridge. Supervisors knew a cold front was moving toward them, but not its severity. The smoke jumpers had to break off around midnight on July 5th when the boulders started rolling down from the top of the ridge, big enough to kill you if one caught you in the head. On the morning of July 6th, the original crew and a new set of smoke jumpers were joined by 20 hotshots from Prineville, Oregon crew. "What the hell's that?" one of them called when they arrived at the fire around 11 a.m. "You've got to be kidding me. The fire's dead." The firefighters began building a second helispot and cutting fire breaks, most of them working in a descending line across the western flank of the ridge in dense brush that some points grew above their head into 12 feet, so thick that the men and women couldn't even see the bottom of the ridge. The firefighters were isolated, cocooned in a thin corridor between tall stands of oak brush. They didn't have eyes on the fire, and no lookout had been posted to keep a good eye on the mountain. But they knew the basic rule that all firefighters learn: don't let a fire get below you on a slope. The reason is simple: a wildfire moves much faster upslope than down. The terrific heat flowing in from the fire pre-cooks the trees and brush while raising the ambient temperature. This can cause the terrain to burst into flame even before the fire reaches it. Crowning fires have been measured moving upslope at 100 miles per hour. Some of the smoke jumpers were nervous. They were deep in the green in front of a burning fire. "Hey," some of the men called to their supervisors, "we shouldn't be here." But none of them pressed the issue. "It's that fine line between bringing up concerns and being a whiner," said one firefighter after the tragedy. The fire that had started on the the ridge had burned down to the drainage below. To the west of the firefighters, there were strands of gamble oak and oak brush on the slope that had lost their twigs and leaves into the fire, but the trunks and branches, dry as tinder, remained. Early in the afternoon, the foreman of the Oregon Hotshots felt the wind shift and reported that the breeze had turned squirrely. The fire was still growing, now covering 127 acres, but it was one among many blazes ripping their way across central and western Colorado. The crews were several hundred yards below the top of the ridge. The bottom of the western drainage, a gully filled with brush that was, in spots less dense than the hillside, was their escape route. The oak was dense. The hotshots and smoke jumpers had cut spaces into the vegetation just to dispose of the cut brush. Helicopters were dumping water on spots from buckets extended from their bellies. The fire entered the afternoon hours, when temperatures are hottest and wildfires are most dangerous. Later, officials would set the chances of ember combusting a leaf or a twig on contact at 90 to 100%. Humidity was low, temperatures were high, the fuel was bone dry. There was only one missing element for a firestorm: wind. Some of the smoke jumpers could see down to the bottom of the gully. There was orange flame eating its way through the oak brush, and burning pine cones and branches were rolling into the foliage. "You know what it's going to do?" one of them said to his partner. "It's going to back down into this draw and come up on this side at us." "Then why don't we get out of here?" the other firefighter said. There were other fires in history where flames had erupted out of a canyon and caught fleeing firefighters on a hillside, and most firefighters could tell you the details from memory. Man Gulch stood out on this list. In 1949, in Gates of Mountains Wilderness, smoke jumpers were walking toward a fire in Man Gulch when a storm front blew into a fireball, burning across 3,000 acres in 10 minutes. The men turned and ran with the fire at their backs, the flames sweeping up a grass-covered slope that angled at 37 degrees. The men threw away their tools and their crosscut saws as they raced toward the ridgeline. The foreman, looking behind to see the flames racing and hearing the rising sound in his ears, took out his matches and lit a fire in the high grass and right in front of his crew. He was hoping to create an escape fire that his men could lie down in while the more powerful firestorm swept around them. But the men charging up behind the foreman refused to enter the escape fire. One cried, "To hell with that!" and the crew raced toward a hogback above them that was covered in boulders and rocks. The foreman lay down in the escape fire and felt the intense updrafts from the firestorm lift him bodily off the ground, but not once but several times. Of the 16 men who ran for their lives, only 3, which included the foreman, escaped. On Storm King Mountain around 3:20 p.m., the dry cold front that the meteorologist had warned dispatchers about arrived at the bottom of the slope. Its winds were gusting at up to 45 miles per hour. When the winds hit the blaze at about 4 p.m., the fire blew up. It turned eastward and started to run, throwing 300-foot flames into the sky. It jumped the fire line below the firefighters and began racing up the slope toward them, deafening loud. Its flames shot 200 feet in the air, then 300. It was a freight train, and it was unstoppable. Just like at Man Gulch, the fire chased the crew, this time across the top of Hell's Gate Ridge. It sucked the oxygen from their mouths and wrapped them in flames as its gases and heat pushed them over the ridgetop and into the canyon on the other side. A helicopter pilot shouted into his radio, but all he heard were a series of clicks, then a single scream that lasted several seconds before the transmission ended or the radio burned up. 2 other firefighters who had been directing helicopters to the second helispot a short distance from Hell's Gate Ridge also ran from the burning wall of flame, but their escape path was blocked by a steep, rocky chute 50 feet deep. With nowhere else to go, they plunged down into the narrow canyon. Here the fire overwhelmed them. 14 men and women died on Storm King Mountain. Firefighters from near and far continued to this day to make pilgrimages to Hell Gates Ridge to see the landscape, to create in their minds a small film of what happened, with the key elements and moments emphasized. They wanted to learn the lessons of South Canyon, inscribe them in their memories. If you're not safe, speak your mind. If a storm is on the way, get the hell away from the fire. Safety first. That summer, I saw a full spectrum of hot-shotting. It was a blur of smoke, chaw, exhilaration, being dog-tired, and brotherhood. I was alive in a way I couldn't remember feeling before, rejuvenated. I could run for hours now. Not fast, but I could run. I was tanned, my chest had filled out with muscle, my thighs were straining against my jeans, and my eyes were clear. I was spending half my time in the wilderness. Bald eagles soared over our campsites in the morning. At night, sometimes in temperatures below freezing, we'd sit around roaring fires talking about famous blazes the veteran guys had fought, like the 1990 Dude Fire, which killed 6 firefighters. 122-degree temperatures in the region of this deadly blaze were extreme enough to close the Phoenix airport because no one knew if fully loaded planes could operate in that kind of heat. Or we put on skits to entertain ourselves. The wooden handle of the Pulowski became a microphone stand, and an axe would become a guitar, and guys would sing into the wilderness hopelessly out of tune. My big star moment was performing I'm a Little Teapot. I had one hand on my hip like the handle and the other curved out like a spout, the whole 9 yards. The competition was fierce. The prize was a tin of Copenhagen cha, and we all wanted it bad. Guys acted out scenes from Granite Mountain's past or imitated each other or Hollywood actors. The dialogue was often unprintable. The winners that day were Brandon Bunch and Boone McCarty, who had done a skit featuring an awesome old-timer named Todd, who worked in Granite Mountain office and did a lot for all of us. Brandon played Todd, and Boone pretended to shave him and put a chaw in his mouth, and it was just hilarious. Guys actually fell off their logs laughing. I didn't have a chance. We were like boys playing in God's country. I grew to love that feeling of being alone with the night and the first in our own private part of the world. Back in Prescott, I'd seen some of my old druggy friends downtown, and they'd do a double take. Brendan? I had no idea how they'd react to me, whether they'd be cynical or hating on me because I wouldn't snort some heroin for old time's sake, but I got none of that. In fact, my druggy friends were proud of me. Imagine that. I was like that guy who made it out of Alcatraz. One guy saw me and said, "Dude, even if you begged me for a toke, I wouldn't give it to you. I wish I was doing what you're doing." When they found out I was a father, they were even more stoked. I was their little success story. There weren't too many of those in Prescott that I knew, so they wished me well, and I did the same to them. I didn't miss the drugs, honestly. I never want to go back. I'd found my calling as a hotshot, but my life was far from perfect. I was having problems with Natalie. We were fighting all the time, mostly about Michaela. My grandma had once told me, "Brendan, you're the one who's going to break the cycle in this family, to really stop the cycle of addiction and hopelessness." I knew I needed to raise Michaela right, and I couldn't do that alone. So during lunch breaks, I'd be on the phone going at it with Natalie. I have a temper. I get it from both my parents. And I'd be yelling, "Bitch, this," and "Motherfucker, that," and be getting it right back from her. One day after I put the phone down, Eric came up to me. "What's going on, Brendan?" I told him about it, about the fights over how to raise my daughter, custody, the whole ball of wax. I got pissed off all over again talking about it. I told him there were times I felt like getting away from it all, heading home just to be with my daughter. "So what are you going to do? Are you going to go home and blow up at her?" I cursed a bunch more. Eric shook his head, his kind blue eyes studying me. "Brendan, what else do you have besides this job? If you leave, you're not going to be able to get another job. You're still on probation. You leave and Natalie will get full custody and your daughter will go up barely knowing you." I nodded. I was a bit shocked by the conversation, actually. No man had ever taken the time to look at my life, analyze my problems, and try to find a way to solve them. I was used to my mom yelling at me about what a fuck-up I was and being rational about how to change. That was brand new to me. Eric wasn't even a dad, but he taught me how to be one. He taught me about patience and compromise. He had a saying, "If I make you a better firefighter, that's all well and good. But if I make you a better man, if I don't make you a better man, then I failed you." I started listening to Eric. I learned patience. I learned to put myself second. I bit down the rage and even tried to see things from Natalie's point of view. But most of all, I manned up. Whenever Eric saw me about to lose it again, he'd find me and ask me what was going on, and I'd instantly feel my blood pressure start to drop. No one had ever done that for me before. Those first nights I had Michaela as a single dad, I didn't know what the hell I was doing half the time. One night, she was sick as all get out, a fever of 102 and lethargic. She couldn't keep any food down, and her head was lolling back like she was a rag doll. I was terrified. I couldn't call my ex, and my mom was out of town. I called up Travis Turbeville, the ex-Marine with the balance problem. Travis had 2 little girls, and his wife was a nurse. He picked up. I launched right into the details, then blurted out, "Dude, what do I do?" "Calm down, don't it?" he said. He told me that first I had to knock down the girl's temperature. Then he instructed me on what medicine to get from CVS, said to draw a cool bath when I got back, walked me through the whole thing. Travis was always talking to me about what he'd learned about being a dad. I remembered on the way home from one big fire, I was talking in the buggy about everything we'd done that day. I was starting to think like Eric or the other veterans, how to outthink a fire. We hooted and hollered and called each other liars. I felt good. We'd saved some homes that day. People had come up and thanked us. I was a little high off it. When we were done bullshitting, Travis smiled at me. "Don't it? One thing. Yeah. When you got home, your brain is going to keep throwing up scenes from the last few days. Your brain doesn't know the fire is over, but you've got to turn that off. Forget the fire. Spend some time with your daughter. Get into her world, man. She doesn't give a shit about hot shots. She cares about you. It was great advice. I didn't understand it then, being 20, and in my own mind, indestructible. But more than one of the dads told me the same thing during that first season. I think they were saying to me was, hold your daughter and forget that anchors and chains and all the rest of it, because this could be the last time you see her. We were kind of a family. We had barbecues to open the season in May and then close it in September. We get together at a local park, cook some ribs, throw the frisbee, meet the families of the other guys, and goof off around with their kids. A lot of hotshot crews only spent time together on the job, but Granite Mountain was tight. One thing you never talked about, though, was the danger of the job. We all knew there were risks, and we talked about specific things to watch out for, but dying on the fire, we never discussed it. We never talked about how our kids would see on the news and be unable to sleep, or how our wives and girlfriends found it hard to let go of us before we flew out to a job. What really could you say?